I'm Roy Cooper. I was a teacher and a coach here for 40 years, and I was a track and field and cross country coach. I had no connection to Apex and Cary football other than I was the athletic director when I was first at Apex. My first 4 years I was the athletic director, but I got involved in doing some research for this for the 100th anniversary of the game.
So walk us through like how you went about doing this, because it was a lot of work.
It has been a lot of work, and it's been a lot of fun too. And I started with yearbooks. I started with the Apex yearbooks, and I even met Kurt Glendenning over at Cary High School, and we went into their media center and pulled out some of their old yearbooks. And there's actually some Cary yearbooks that are online. North Carolina Digital has some material online. And then I went down to the Olivia Rainey Library and met actually a former parent of one of my students, Tony Asagueda, and she helped me with doing some research and introduced me to newspapers.com. And I got ended up with getting some connections with newspapers.com, and I've been doing some research with the old News and Observers, which has been a very interesting expedition.
Tell us, what's the most interesting story or fact that you've come up with?
Well, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of things that are just coming across. And first of all, when you're doing the research, I have to be careful not to get lost in all the other things that are going on. But there's a couple of things that stand out. And one is that the coaches back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, when you get a name who's a coach of, say, Cary High School or Apex High School, and then you start searching for that name, what you'll find is their name will start popping up as an NC State football player or a Wake Forest football player or a Carolina football player. And you have to remember that Wake Forest University was located at that time not in Winston-Salem but in Wake Forest. So they were all very, very tightly packed. And so the coaches would come like straight from college and take over these programs. Now that's not, I know we're going 7A and 8A this year, but I still think from my career of the 4As. But you wouldn't think of a new coach coming out of college taking over a major high school program. But Apex and Cary were both small schools back then, and it's kind of interesting having been in this area. Cary was a bigger town. Ed alluded to that a little earlier. You know, Cary was much bigger than Apex was. Both have grown. But there's several articles when the Raleigh schools, Hugh Morrison or Raleigh High School, the predecessor of Broughton High School, when they played Cary or Apex, they would refer to them as the rural schools. So that's kind of funny. And then the other thing is there's a great story, and it has to do with Cary High School. That it's probably the most interesting story I came across. There was a coach at Cary High School in 1940 and 41, Y.W. Howard. And after Pearl Harbor, he joined the Army, and so World War II had broken out for the United States. And in 1942, there's an article, Cary's first game was against Garner High School, and it said that they had been practicing without a coach prior to the game, and then they had showed up for the game and were getting ready to play the game, and Y.W. Howard came walking out on the field in his Army uniform and inspired the Cary boys to a victory that year, 27-7. So there's some interesting stories like that I've come across.
You've also been working on trying to find the results for every single Cary Apex game.
Yes.
Tell us what you know about that.
I've been successful for the most part in finding it. Of the 100 years that they've been playing football, 15 years they have not played, and that was due to either being, like recently in 2019, 2020, they didn't play because Apex and Cary were separated into the different conferences. But in the 1960s and 70s, there was a pretty long stretch where Apex and Cary, I think it was from 66 to 78, that they only played twice in that period of time. And Cary had moved up to the 3A ranks, and Apex was still in the 2A ranks. And so they just didn't schedule those games in there. But of the 100 years they've been playing, Cary has won 50 games, Apex has won 29, and there have been 3 ties. And then there are 5 years, I just can't find any result as to whether, I know one of those years, 1929, they played, I just cannot find a result of the game. And then in 43, 1944, 45, the war years, and then 1946, the year right after the war, I cannot find if they in fact played. Cary had a team in 1944 and 45. Apex had a team again in 1946. I just can't find a record if the two schools played.
What inspires you to do all of this?
We had a conversation. Rob and Scott asked me if I would come over and meet with NAS representatives, and they were talking about, because it's the Apex Hall of Fame game, and I'm still involved with the Apex Hall of Fame. And so we went and had lunch after we had the meeting over at the Wake Med Sports Facility. And so we were having lunch, and I just remembered from back in the day when I first started at Apex that there was an Apex kid who broke a 99-yard run at Cary High School. So Cary and Apex were playing. I think it was the first game of the year. His name was Ronald Dunn, and Ronald went 99 yards for a touchdown. Apex unfortunately lost the game 7-6. We missed the extra point, and then Cary scored later in the game and kicked the extra point. And so I just made the comment, oh, hey, we should do some research and find out some of the great moments in the history of the rivalry. And so Rob said, well, we'd be open to that. And so I took it upon myself to start looking, and then the more I started looking, the more interesting it got. And as a history teacher, I like that kind of thing, and so it's been very interesting to me to research the two.
You've been in the Apex community, as you said, for like 40 years. What do you think the Apex-Cary rivalry means? How do you characterize that?
Well, I think it's good-natured, and I think especially from my point of view as a track and cross-country coach, there was always mutual respect. The coaches there, and Jerry Dotson coached for many, many years, and we just had a great friendship in addition to the rivalry. But I think the two schools and the student bodies shared so many common areas that they would go hang out in, and the Cary Town Center, back when it was a thing, before some of the changes that have come along here, they just had a lot of stomping grounds that they shared. And so naturally you're always looking for, my school's better than your school. Well, what shows that? Athletic programs show that. The arts, I love the arts, but the arts don't compete against one another, although the Cary band I think would argue that back in the day. But the football team, that was an easy way to say, we have the upper hand at this point in time. So I think the connections that the two schools had, the mix of where they went and how close we were in proximity, it's a little like the State Duke, State Carolina rivalries that you see.
Do you think it's important for the kids that are going through the schools today to understand the past?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's important because I think the other thing you have to understand too is that we have to acknowledge, and it's very difficult. There were two things that were difficult for me to deal with, given where I'm living, the time period I'm living in. One was seeing the onset of World War II, and especially reading in the articles in 1941 about I know the history, I know the war's coming, but in September and October and November, as they were playing their 1941 football season, they wouldn't have known that Pearl Harbor was getting ready to get bombed and the United States was going to get dragged into war. And then the second is that, Ed mentioned this, that he came along and it was just the time period, but he lived in a segregated society. And so there was a white Apex High School and a black Apex High School, Apex Consolidated High School. And so to see that history and the fact that when I'm doing this research, this is primarily Apex High School. Apex Consolidated also had a sports program, but that is almost all lost. And they were so small, I don't believe they had a football program. They had basketball and track and field and baseball. It's a very, very different feel for what the kids have today.
Is there anything else I should ask that I haven't?
I think from Apex's point of view, more recently, I think we're prouder of our football results because it's a whole lot closer in the last, I think since 1979, Cary still got the upper hand, but it's something like 19-15 or 19-16 in wins and losses. But in the 1950s and 60s, Cary had a very dominant program back in then. And I think it's another interesting thing too about the state championships is that you had to set your schedule up to be able to get into the state championships. And Cary had a tremendous run in the early 1950s, but only played for one state championship because they only got in the state playoffs one time, and that was 1955.
And Apex played for two, right?
or yes, 19, either 29 and 30 or 30 and 31. And lost to, I think it was Reedsville twice, but Eastern champions twice in the Class B playoffs.